Well, first of all, I'm delighted to be here at the Fed, and I want to thank, can you hear me? Is this on? Okay. And I want to thank Anthony and the Nonprofit Finance Fund, who have been an incredible partner. And you may ask, why do we partner so much with the nonprofit finance and others like social finance, AGM, and others that support the nonprofit sector? And I'll just share a little background and then introduce the panel. But our focus at Bank of America from the foundation is really on solving the underlying issues for economic mobility and working with partners who are addressing issues such as connecting people to the workforce, connecting people to the educations and skills they need, meeting people where they're at, addressing issues around housing and homelessness. So really we're working with the most vulnerable populations, really trying to create that pathway to success. And we do this across the country. But why the work of the Nonprofit Finance Fund is so important to us, we realize that strengthening the sector and supporting the sector so they can do more and bringing more money into the tent is critically important, because right now all the philanthropy in the world and all the government funding can't solve the issues that are before us. They're complex, and the work that the Nonprofit Finance Fund is doing is really clarifying the needs of the sector. So I have to applaud Anthony and his team for this work. I'm happy to say we are a general operating funder. We invest in the leadership of nonprofits through our Neighborhood Builders program. So we're really focusing on those fundamental things that will strengthen the sector and make your work easier and give you the flexibility to take on these challenges in new and different ways. So with that, I'm really excited about the panel that I'm going to moderate. They really don't need me to moderate it because they're the experts. But suffice it to say, this group of individuals have come together, one from the private sector, one from the nonprofit sector, and one from the government sector, to take on a new framework for addressing homelessness in Boston. And I say this because it's creative, and I think the work of their work together has really allowed them to monetize how we approach homelessness in a prevention model. And I'll let them explain their various roles in this, but I think the goal of this is to really not just provide a bed for people who are, evicted from their homes, but really create the opportunity to keep people in their homes. And I want to go back to something that has been said by Anthony. People are really at the heart of this. And when I looked at this collaborative, although they're preventing homelessness, they're really changing the trajectory of people's lives. So with that, I'm just going to quickly introduce the panelists. I know you have their bios in your agenda. But first, I want to introduce Matt Pritchard, who is the President and Executive Director of HomeStart. He's been working since 2015 to meet the needs of Greater Boston most vulnerable, and that is the homeless. Matt has worked, I think the story is that you actually stayed in a shelter for 12 months to understand the challenges homeless people present or have, and since that time he's really worked in many ways to lead this effort. I also want to introduce Sheila Dillon, who's the Chief of Housing for the City of Boston. As a member of Mayor Walsh's cabinet, Chief Dillon acts as the advisor on housing issues in the city. She's passionate about solving the issues around homelessness, and I know she does spearheads the city's efforts, managing a staff of about 150 and a budget of $83 million. So clearly housing and addressing homeless issues are important to the mayor. And last but not least, Pam Goodwin, who's the CEO of Beacon Communities. She joined Beacon in 1996 as its vice president and has helped the company to grow from producing 600 units to nearly 12,000 units across the state. She's deeply involved in affordable housing, and in her current role, she oversees the performance of the entire company. So with that, we have a player from the social sector, the government sector, and the private sector all convening around this issue of homelessness. So I'll just move over here and we'll start the show. Right. So I'm going to start to really make sure everyone understands sort of the macro issues affecting Boston and homelessness. So Sheila, I'm going to start with you. I think it would be helpful to the audience to frame the size of the eviction crisis in Boston and the toll it has on families.
Sure. So thank you. The city of Boston's been working on homelessness, and we run. I mean, we've really been trying to reform the individual system, the system for individuals, with some success. But families is sort of a state-run system. But the city said we could do two things. We can continue to build affordable housing, which we've been doing at a rapid clip, and we can work on the eviction issue. So we, with HomeStart, started to collect data every year to understand who was getting evicted, what the rates were that people were going into court, what the eviction rates were, being asked to leave, who was doing the evicting, what was the reason for the eviction. So a great data set to begin the work with. And we looked at, first we started this work in 2015, looking at evictions that started in 2015, went through 2016, and there were about 5,000 cases that went to housing court. 2,100 of those would end up in eviction, mostly families, mostly low-income families. And there were other characteristics that we found, which were fascinating. Most of them were coming from subsidized housing. You're going to hear about some of the effective programs. We didn't know that when we started. And most were for very small amounts of money. 70% were for rent arrearage, and that rent arrearage was only about $2,000. So the data showed us very clearly, this is something we can impact, this is something we can do something about.
So just one follow-up question. Are there areas of the city that are hardest hit?
Most of our housing, affordable housing, is outside of the core. It's more located in neighborhoods. So because 70% of the evictions were coming from subsidized housing or people with mobile Section 8 certificates, they were mostly happening in the neighborhoods.
So Pamela, thank you.
Sure.
Turning to you, just to share a little bit about what this crisis how it has impacted your work with Beacon Communities in terms of rental properties.
Sure. So I'll just focus on the housing we have in the city of Boston. We own and manage over 1,800 units of housing that serves extremely low and low-income families. And I would say, from our standpoint, let me first talk about how eviction affects us. We have huge waiting lists. So if you're on one of our waiting lists for affordable housing that has a subsidy attached to it, you're going to be waiting a very long time. But following up on what Sheila said, about 3 or 5 years ago, we started looking at our eviction rates, in part prompted by Sheila. And I'm just talking about people who are evicted for non-payment, not cause evictions. And our number of evictions was quite appalling. And we always, as a for-profit or even not-for-profit company, focuses on NOI and cash flow. So our managers know that it's important to try to collect rent. But the downside of that is that people were getting evicted. And evicting people really seemed to be in conflict with our company's goals and missions, which is to both care about the people who work for us and care about the people we serve. So there seemed to be a real problem here. So, and we have a resident services department, and what we started doing was really taking a deeper look at what was going on around evictions for non-payment of rent, and started to work very, very seriously on developing relationships with providers to try to address the underlying cause, because it's often not money that's the primary cause. A lot of people have a lot of other issues. And so we started developing relationships, and I'll let Matt talk about the program we're doing with Matt. But right before I came to this meeting, I checked on the number of evictions that we had this year for non-payment of rent in the city of Boston, and it's 3. That's over 1,800 units. So I feel very excited about that, but it doesn't just happen. It requires real working with our staff and with outside providers.
Great. So you're very intentional about this work.
Absolutely.
Yep. So Matt, your work, you were in the, I think, situation where you had the opportunity to sort of test a hypothesis that keeping people in their homes and providing some support to do so would yield better results than letting them fall into homelessness and then searching for housing afterwards. So why don't you describe a little bit about your early work and then what led to this solid collaborative?
Sure. So HomeStart historically was a housing search and stabilization support provider for individuals experiencing homelessness in Boston. And in the early 2000s, we had a handful of people come in during our walk-in center saying, I know as a fact I will be homeless in 30 days because I'm being evicted. Can you provide housing search services for us? And there were restrictions around who we could serve. They had to be homeless as defined by HUD, et cetera. And yet our board and leadership team felt like that was terribly inefficient and an opportunity for us to stop the problem before it starts. And so we began to test a program, and the program is fundamentally very simple. And that is, we meet a family in housing court who's there for a non-payment issue. We make a small payment to the property owner to stop the eviction and buy some time. We work with the family to create a blueprint around what the precipitating drivers were associated with their eviction episode. And then we work with that family for 12 months while they repay the balance of that debt, or we find other resources to cover the balance of that debt. And after 12 months of a program, we knew that 97% of our families maintained housing at the end of 12 months.
And so do you track them beyond 12 months, or is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's related to the topic of our conference today. I mean, that's fundamentally the program revolves around its outcomes in a couple of different ways. So when we approached, just to take a quick step back, one thing that we learned, so the Boston Housing Authority reports through Sheila, and we ask our friends and leadership at the Boston Housing Authority if they would tell us how much it costs them to evict a family. And after about a year of going through their books, they learned that it was costing them about $10,000 to evict a family because of the turnover of the unit, the legal fees, the constable fees, the storage fees, vacancy, et cetera. But it was only costing HomeStart $2,000 to prevent the eviction from happening. And so we approached Bill McGonigal and asked him if he would create with us a per intervention reimbursement rate service. And so they would pay us for the services because they knew there was a huge return associated with us intervening. So the finance team at the BHA told us that last year we saved them over $1 million, last year alone.
So government efficiency for sure.
So related to the outcomes, we didn't know what was happening after 12 months because our program was a 12-month program. And so we asked them to pull a cohort of families we had worked with 36 and 48 months prior, and that was a data set of 300 households to look at what the outcomes were after 48 months. And after 48 months, only 5% of the 300 families we had worked with had been evicted for non-payment. And so that was the piece of data we needed to know that the program was worked and it stuck. And so we built into the contract with the BHA a way to mitigate against some risk for them. So upon engagement with the family, they will pay us 75% of the amount that we had contracted for. And 12 months after the intervention, if the family has fulfilled all of the responsibilities associated with the negotiated agreement, they would pay us the balance. And so from the Housing Authority's perspective, that again allowed them to take some risk off. And for us, it provided sort of a built-in way to get really good data, because the BHA and now Beacon is not going to give us data they're going to want to know exactly how stable this family is before reimbursing us.
So Matt, you have a contract with the Housing Authority, and you play a role too in terms of working with other private companies who are renting properties, right?
No, We work with HomeStart and one other group called Metro Boston on avoiding eviction, but we just do it on Beacon properties. And right now, HomeStart's just working at, on homeless prevention. They're working at 2 of our properties, one very large, almost 1,000 units, the other 275 units. And then they're also working with us on another property that's located in Chinatown that's housing chronically homeless or homeless families.
So let me reframe my question. So my understanding is that you were working to create a contract or a rental contract that other property owners
So-
would use that would be very much
Yeah,
aligned
no.
with this
We
partnership.
worked with HomeStart. We were the first for-profit developer to work with HomeStart to create a contract for us. If HomeStart can now hopefully encourage other private owners to use the contract we used so that they could enter
So
into
you're really
agreements.
leading the charge, just in terms of setting a
Correct.
great example that others can follow.
Yeah.
So that the partnership is, you're all working to the same goals. But how do you meet regularly? How does that
Yeah.
work in terms of intentionality around this big project that could be scaled, right? I mean,
So I don't, Matt, if you want to talk about your work in working, reaching out to other owners, but the city now is tracking overall data every single year. And, excuse me, year over year, we've seen a decrease in actual executions of eviction. It's down by 19% overall, 21% in subsidized housing. And we're now in housing court getting the data for this year. So we're using programs like this. We're using just the exposure of the data and you know, the exposure of the data has been just, I think, game changer. And we're sharing best practices. The city of Boston is funding affordable housing developments all the time. So in our rounds now, we're saying to developers, give us your eviction prevention plans. So this is one component of a larger sort of initiative, but a critical component, because I think we're really showing that targeted interventions with small amount of money really make the difference.
Absolutely. And the other piece that's critical, and Matt and I talk about this a lot, are the people that are working together have to really work together. It requires constant and open communication. Our folks meet all the time. I think there are weekly meetings in addition to, you know, sort of off-the-cuff type meetings. But it really requires a commitment by all the parties to do things better and to stay really in close communication. It's all about that.
So just looking at this, where you are today, in terms of the concept of scaling this, growing this, what do you think the chances or the opportunities are?
Sure. So, so last year in Boston, we prevented 459 evictions, households from being evicted. But there were 1,100 families who qualified for our service who we didn't have the philanthropic resources to prevent their eviction. And so that's the reason we created the Renew Collaborative, this per intervention reimbursement rate model, because when we've talked with property owners, and so Pam and Beacon is a bit of an anomaly, the conversation usually goes like this, you know, we have this service, and they would say, I have no idea how many folks we evicted last year because there's never been an alternative to an eviction. So the expense is buried into the legal line item, the maintenance line item, the bad debt line item, but through this housing court data, we could say, well, this is how many folks you evicted, this is likely how much you spent on that eviction, and this is what you would have saved if you had engaged with a reimbursement rate contract with us. And so for us right now, it's the first per intervention reimbursement rate contract like this in the country. And so, you know, Sheila is leading this awareness campaign around evictions is very important to getting the attention of property owners to understand that they're going to be held accountable to an effective response to the problem.
In addition to the monetary costs of legal for evictions and turning the apartment, at least our managers don't like evicting people, and it takes a lot of time. So coming up with a program that avoids eviction makes a lot of sense.
Right, and just think of the opportunity costs. So for instance, if this didn't happen, when you think about people's lives you changed. What would it look like if you never did that? Like, how many more people would be in homeless shelters? I mean, do you ever calculate that cost?
So the very scary thing about the Massachusetts system, in Boston being included in that, is that if you're a family and you are evicted from subsidized housing, or you're evicted from a rental unit where you're using a rental voucher, and these are our poorest families, you cannot access state shelter for 3 years. That's a rule. So what happens, these families, very vulnerable, very poor, low-income families, bounce around in very bad situations. So they're even more vulnerable than the families in family shelter, which is a pretty good system. And no shelter is good, I'm not saying it's shelter, but as far as services and being safe, the state runs a good shelter system, but these families can't access it for 3 years. So it's even more critical that they don't enter.
So
Exactly.
this is a crazy question. Where did they go?
The street, friends.
Friends, cars, mostly friends, bad friends, relatives that don't want them, but they really, really bounce around.
They're just bouncing
Yeah.
around.
Very
So,
vulnerable.
For instance, if you have children, when you think about families, kids in school, they're moving around to schools, they're
Right.
absent a lot. So
Right.
it really has this huge social.
Right, and the family's probably not, the head of household or whomever is not going to have a job. It's going to be very hard to maintain a job when you're living out of your car. So being evicted for any reason, but for non-payment of rent from affordable subsidized housing is really bad.
Yeah.
You will be homeless.
My introduction to the eviction crisis was when I was living in the bunks of a shelter. A bunkmate of mine was 25 years old, he had a 5-year-old little boy, and he was evicted for an issue that was of absolute no fault of his own. And they lived in his car for 2 months, and in one afternoon, he went to pick his son up from school, and he was met at the school by the principal, a police officer, his teacher, and a worker from the Department of Children and Families, and he lost custody of his son right on the front steps of the school. And so he didn't have family support, so he moved into the emergency shelter and saved money for like 6 months for first, last, and security, finally got housing, and then was reunited with his son like 10 months later when his son experienced all this trauma. And the reality is that I know what it cost that landlord to evict Jason. And it was not in the landlord's financial best interest to do so, but the Renew Collaborative wasn't a thing then, and so there's all kinds of unnecessary trauma that we can stop.
So I'm going to turn it over to the audience and after one question, so be thinking of them. So what is the role private philanthropy plays in all of this? We've talked about the public sector, the private sector, and government. How does philanthropy play a role in your scaling or your future work?
Yeah, so it plays a very important role in that, in the last couple of months, I've had 2 or 3 very large property owners in Boston say, I would love you to provide Renew Collaborative services for our tenants, but we don't have the cash flow in order to do that. And so there's a demand that we cannot meet because of a cash flow issue. And then the second piece, and this is something that you and the Bank of America Foundation and Combined Jewish Philanthropies and United Way are helping us with, of just cash, because going into a new region requires us to present proof of concept for a couple of years, like we did in Boston, before anyone agreed to pay for it. And so we've identified a partner, Father Bill's in Mainspring on the South Shore, which is an outstanding homeless service provider, to be kind of our partner with the South Shore delivery of the Renew Collaborative services.
So is this
2,000 units in the South Shore, we should talk.
There we go. Thanks, Sam.
So is this collaborative effort, is it getting national attention, or are you often sought after in terms of being that expert?
So in the last 3 months, we've been approached by Charlotte, Sacramento, Los Angeles, Houston, Washington, D.C.
The answer is yes.
But again, from a bandwidth, from a philanthropic perspective, and we do not have the infrastructure to be able to support that. And so there is all kinds of opportunity for us to make an impact outside of the Commonwealth with more resources.
This is a very scalable program.
That's great. So, you've scaled in a fairly short time.
Yeah, it's the whole promise is that economically sustainable. And so we need cash to sort of provide the proof of concept and get
The
it going.
runway,
And then-
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm going to turn it to the audience for questions, I'm sure. Okay, 2 mics. And if you could just say where you're from before you ask the question, that would be great.
Hi, my name is Jean Terranova, and I'm with Community Servings, and I'm shorter than this microphone. Or I can just hold it. So my question is, when you engage with government, it seems to me, in listening to your talk, that there are some definite policy solutions to some of these problems. And what I'm wondering is, A, do you engage in advocacy? And B, if you do, does it help or hurt you to have government involved in your coalition?
It helps us. I mean, for reasons that we talked about. And again, this is, Sheila's commitment to displacement and the eviction crisis is without solicitation. I mean, she is a leader in the space for the city. I mean, our objective is for the city of Boston to be the first city in the country to completely eliminate all episodes of homelessness by way of non-payment eviction for the working poor and families with subsidies. And the question is, how do you get there? Like, what are the tipping points? And Sheila having a deliberate plan of addressing that and holding property owners accountable to be able to tell her in their portfolio what their eviction patterns are is fundamentally important. I mean, to us, we're agnostic around the intervention necessary to eliminate non-payment evictions. Like, we are completely, and so any ideas that Sheila has to loop in Metro Boston or other partners is fabulous for us. And so for us, it's a 3-part team. It is government, private industry, social sector working together to solve what's a manageable but complex social problem.
And I just want to add, one of the things that I think makes HomeStart so special, Renew Collaborative, whatever the name is it's not just paying someone's rent. It's working on the underlying cause. And that, not everyone does that. And that's a really important component of what HomeStart does and part of what I think makes it successful.
Did you want to spend a moment describing some of the things that you do to support families in the process? Because I think that would be helpful, because there are other kinds of providers out here that there may be a connection to.
Sure. I mean, one of the advantages of being a third party, so not the property owner or landlord, is that if a tenant knows that our exclusive interest is making certain that they never experience homelessness, they will typically disclose every driving factor that their eviction grew out of. And so if their uncle had an addiction to scratch tickets and was coming over and abusing them, they might not disclose that to property owner, but they would to us. And so it's easy for us to create a blueprint. I mean, there are common denominators, common themes, but one of the advantages of working with a family for 12 months is that we see like seasonal issues associated with them not being able to pay rent. And so in the wintertime, it's utilities assistance. In the fall, it's back to school expenses. In the summer, it's childcare expenses. And so because we work with a family for 12 months, we can sort of triage and identify resources for them to use so that they can take that knowledge and use it going forward.
My name is Connie from Northeastern University. I'm curious about Opportunity Zone and how this piece of legislation is perceived from your perspective, whether that's welcoming than disruptive, and what are the unintended consequences that could be created with this piece of legislation. Thank you.
I think I can take that because we're looking at it. So for folks that don't know, the current administration put forth this idea of opportunity zones. They just published very skinny regulations on it. It allows people with capital gains to invest in designated zones and escape some tax payments. And I think I have those back in my office. But so the city is very concerned that a lot of money flooding into certain census tracts could cause gentrification. So we've been very, very careful with limiting the kinds of zones that we're allowing. But we are looking at how we could direct some of this money coming in productive ways to build affordable housing or job centers, but not just speculation of buildings and real estate, which could further exacerbate our gentrification issues. So I think it's early on, but Enterprise is doing a lot of good work in this, and we're sort of learning as we go.
Hi, it's Jen. I am just curious, I have a two-part question for all of you. From the different lenses that you bring, what did it take to make this happen? Because this is pioneering, it was risky. What did it take to get your various entities to do this? And then Matt, and maybe that's more a question for Pam and for Sheila, or maybe for you as well, for example, Bank of America has a role as well. And then Matt, my question for you is, you talked about all the cities that have all this interest, which is terrific. And you said you don't have the infrastructure. What would it take for you to be able to be responsive?
For us, it really wasn't that complicated. We started working on the issue of homeless prevention as well as providing housing for the homeless prior to meeting with HomeStart. And we just decided that it was the right thing. I mean, there really wasn't any discussion. We saw the numbers. We said, this is appalling. We need to do something. And so then our staff started working with Matt and his staff and negotiated a contract, and I think it's gone fairly well, right?
I think for the city, what was interesting is, we still do. We field phone calls in the Office of Housing Stability. We have an office that takes phone calls from people that are in rental distress, and we would deal with them in one-offs. And we sort of had a general idea that there was a non-payment problem. We had a general idea that buildings that changed hands were more likely to be, the tenants to be at risk. But we would deal with them just one-on-one. And then, I'm sure some of you have read it, we all read the book Eviction. Eviction by Matthew Desmond. And after I read it, and I'd met with him and over at Harvard, and I said, wow, what does Boston's data look like? And I knew there had been some early data evaluations, but it hadn't happened recently, so we worked with HomeStart, got interns in, and then once we had the data, the path became more clear. We knew what the numbers were, what the issues were, where it was happening, for how much, and that really became my eureka moment as far as yes, we can do something about this problem. Before, it just felt open-ended. Now it felt like we know what the problem is, we know what's happening, we know why it's happening and who's doing it. Let's see if we can't start creating some interventions. So for me, it was getting the data and then sort of putting forth a plan.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I still get calls from Sheila every so often about someone who's facing eviction for non-payment. And often what that is about is a household who just will not participate in any program. And that's heartbreaking and it's terrible, but it is the reality. There are some people it's just very hard to get to participate in the program. So it's not like, everyone is compliant. Sometimes you'll get people who just won't participate.
And I would just add, from our vantage point, from a funder's vantage point, investing in a program with results that has leverage is extremely, it's an extremely wise investment. And I will tell you, when I look across the country at homelessness, it is a huge issue. And no one has a silver bullet yet, but when you start to look at the underlying data on your trial, it's really impressive. And, we know that homelessness is not just caused by payment of eviction. Other issues are around mental health. I mean, there's a whole plethora of things that cause homelessness, but this is so solvable that it was amazing to see. And I have to say, Alicia was very engaged in that grant here in Boston. But homelessness it's really a crisis in this country. And I think the point that was made at the very beginning, it isn't just putting your head on a bed every night. That's not home. It's going to school. It's being part of the community. It's having served life, civic life. And when you deny people of that, it strips the community for sure. And changes lives forever, really. But anyway, so I applaud the work that you're doing. As a funder, it's easy. Good question here.
Yes, hi, it's me again. So I love hearing about this contract and the fact that it can be replicated in other places. The fact that you have looked into the underlying causes, it seems like you're getting some traction with that, intrigues me that you may be learning things about solving other types of problems. So the Federal Reserve Board did an analysis that something like 45% of Americans would have to sell something to come up with $400. Either they don't have it or they don't have anything of that value, or they need to sell something. It's not liquid. And that creates other problems. Some of them don't lose their homes, but you know, it can escalate when they have issues come up. Maybe they drop out of community college, whatever. There's a lot of things. If you're learning something about how to get people to have that buffer for that rent payment, but even smaller amounts than that, there are other people that want to know that answer. Are there things that you're learning that work for the individuals in this population? Are there things that people should be getting ahead of? So not only do they not get to 2,000, you know, but they don't get into that situation in the first place. And if there aren't easy things, what other systems, you know, are you talking to, do you think need reforms, fundamental ones, maybe long-term ones, right, that would help you do your work? So maybe that's two different questions, but I'm intrigued by that part about addressing underlying causes.
Those are two very huge questions that I could spend a lot of time answering. Just at a quick, high level, I mean, fundamentally, one of the tools that works best for our households is just having a rent payee service. So someone who will pay their rent automatically, withdrawing from their disability check or from their public benefits, et cetera. That is, like, at the core, the most useful tool. Now, we don't require families to use that, but that's one way that we're fairly certain is a key reason that the long-term outcomes are so good. In terms of reform, there are inefficient systems, like every system related to touching families experiencing poverty. I could give you a list of inefficiencies. And so, you know, potentially, since you work here, we could go out for coffee sometime, and right around the corner.
I just want to reiterate something that Matt said. We have an online rent payment system, and we, again, can't require people to do it, and usually participation in our market rate units is very, very high. In affordable units, it's usually very low, and we've done a lot of education around that, and we now have participation slightly above 50% within our affordable units, which is very significant. And I think that's also part of the reason our non-payment cases has gone down so much.
So when I think about this partnership, you obviously have partners beyond who's on this panel. So when you talk about the underlying issues, do you work with other nonprofits? Is it a referral process? How does that work? Because some of these issues can be very complex, and how does that connect to the work that the city's doing around homelessness? Because I know it's a big issue for the mayor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, we have a luxury of sort of a robust service sector ecosystem here in the city. And so Metro Boston, who distributes RAFT funding, which is rental assistance for families in transition. It's a state line item for families in emergencies. We have a very close relationship with them, who provides rental assistance that some of our families qualify for. Greater Boston Legal Services, very, very close partners for a relatively small percentage of our folks who have more complicated legal issues associated with their eviction. And so there's every shelter provider in the city. And so from a referral perspective, I mean, sometimes it's the judge in housing court saying, HomeStart, you need to be involved in this situation, or this family will be evicted. So referrals, word of mouth, property owners, other social service organizations, really across the board. Families come from everywhere. But again, we have a waiting list of 200 to 300 families at any given time. And we don't do any advertising. And like I said, there were 1,100 families who qualified for our service whose evictions we could not prevent last year because we didn't have the resources to meet their needs.
That's tough. I mean, when you know you have the solution.
Right.
So, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, like, as I mentioned earlier, that the family system, it's funny, individuals and family, they really have their own systems and ecosystems. And like I mentioned, at the city, we're very focused on eviction prevention and building affordable housing and making sure that families have access to good, safe housing and they can remain there. With the individuals, it's sometimes eviction, but it's a lot of other things as well. So it's a whole different system. But we have spent the last 3 years working with some of the folks I see here on reforming the shelter system and making it a much more of a housing-based system with support services than a shelter system. Shelter is a necessary evil, but really focus on the people that are stuck in shelter first. And now we're really working on making sure that as people arrive, they're quickly triaged, we quickly figure out what they need, get them what they need so their stays are much shorter. We have housed thousands of individuals in the last 3 years. Unfortunately, because the need is so great, people keep coming. So now we're really focused on keeping those shelter stays very, very short. So that too has gotten a whole, in the last 3-4 years, a complete redo as far as how we look at shelter.
We have another question.
Hi, my name is Barbara Kim, and I'm from Tech Goes Home. I just wanted to follow up on Jen's question. She had asked many parts, but the one that really interests me is the question of scale. And Matt, are you at the point that you even have the bandwidth to talk with these? And again, what resources would you need to have a serious conversation?
Sure. So, so if you think about the arc of what HomeStart is trying to accomplish, I mean, it is, we have a housing search agenda, we have a stabilization agenda, and we have an eviction prevention agenda. And it happens that we're talking about a project of the whole, which is the Renew Collaborative and the scale associated with that. And so when I think about that question, the answer is part of the whole, to make the whole, the infrastructure a place where we can execute sufficiently. And that number is just above $4 million. I mean, and so if you're interested in specifics, I can lay those. I would love to talk with anyone in this room who's interested in those specifics. But, it is this intervention, if every eviction in the country is represented in this pyramid, this intervention would effectively chop the top off of that pyramid. It works for families with subsidies and the working poor. And so it is not going to solve the eviction crisis nationally, but has the potential to put a bigger dent in family homelessness than anything I've ever seen. And so in my view, like, the opportunity is huge. And yet, while we have a process laid out of what that might look like to work in these cities, it's hard to spend a lot of our headspace there only because we don't have the $4 million to sort of go there yet.
How many million? 4 million, is that what you said?
Yes.
You have a price tag on it. That's good. That's good. So if there's not any other questions from the audience, I think we're almost at time too. Is that correct? Oh, we have a little time. Okay. Okay.
A follow-up to this discussion about scale. Hi, I'm Ian Galloway at the San Francisco Fed. And I feel like I've been in conversation. This is so inspiring, by the way. And I would love to see models like this replicated across the country, in every city that needs it. I'm from Portland, Oregon. We have a substantial growing homelessness challenge there. And I feel like I meet these incredibly charismatic, effective nonprofit leaders and collaboratives who have solutions to these problems. And it's not just homelessness, it's sort of across the board. And usually there's enormous cost savings to the system. But of course the system is not a monolithic thing. It's actually multiple systems. It's the housing authority, it's the criminal justice system, it's DHS, it's the education system. But given the savings, why can't we replicate these success stories? What's keeping us from doing what is on its face the obvious thing, and improving the lives of the people that we're working with at the same time?
Oh, thank you, Ian. That was well said.
We ask ourselves the same question.
Yes, no, it is, and it's worth saying that, you know, every state has different tenants' rights laws. Evictions there's a different process in every state, and so, meaning one of the reasons it's expensive to evict families in Massachusetts is because it takes up to 6 months to evict a family, and there's legal expenses associated with that. There's lost rent accumulating associated with that. In other places, there are not very strong tenants' rights laws, and so you can evict a family like that, so there's less of a legal expense. However, in some of those markets, you know, there's less of a demand in housing. There's not so much pressure, and so if you evict a family, there could be 2-3 months of vacancy associated with that. And so, you know, there is market peculiarity that requires some attention, and so in a conversation with other places, we test some of the variables that are necessary for the intervention to work there.
I'll add to that, and I think I'm sitting here owning it too, which is not feeling good, but it is hard for a government official that manages a budget to do certain things to think about the cost savings in education. So if that child's not held back, that's a savings for lots of reasons. You know, it's his ability to get a job or get into college or not repeat a grade or a health outcome. I'm going to save the Boston Medical Center, health, especially if the family is not insured, their emergency room costs, because the family might go there more often if they're not, safely housed. And it's very hard for me, as managing budgets, and they're always too tight, and there's always more to do than what you have, to be benevolent and say, I'm going to save BMC, or I'm going to save the school system some money by us doing this. So, but I think we need to be better at that and really look across and sort of say, how can we save each other, resources? It's all about, do I have money to spend on this? And we don't necessarily look at it holistically. So I'm going to do better at that.
I agree with that. I think this is a little off topic, but we spend a lot of time on wellness and health in our developments that serve very low-income seniors and people with disabilities. It is clear to us that if we provide wellness services in our communities, that people stay out of the hospital. It's clear. Trying to get the medical people, the insurers, to talk with each other and to talk to us is almost impossible. Like, I can't go to those meetings anymore. It's clear that it saves all these insurers money. But in Massachusetts, we have lots of insurers. So it really talks to the benefits of a single payer system, because you got 6 different insurers in one building. They're not going to talk to each other. So
I will say this year that we had a bit of a breakthrough. Mass Health, which is our sort of state insurance system, started to fund more of our support services for individuals that were homeless, their support services to keep them housed. So once we found them a unit to live in, support service, once you find the precious unit that an individual can move into, then it's like, how are we going to fund the years of support services to make sure that they remain housed? And Mass Health is stepping up, and they are spending more money to keep people housed, which is great. They recognize the savings.
But there really is, I think it's a silo issue, and trying to get people to work together takes a lot of time and effort, and there's got to be commitment on everyone's part to work together. So I think it's the same issue that we see across the board.
We were talking earlier about the whole person, and it is still bifurcated, all the different services, because the same
Absolutely.
families probably matriculate across
Yes.
the many opportunities, whether nonprofit or through government agencies that are offered. So we have another question here.
Hi, my name is Aisha Francis, and I am from Benjamin Franklin Institute of Technology. And I have a question about the investment in results part of all of this. So for HomeStart and also for the city, how much of your resources are invested in getting the outcomes that you alluded to that made it profitable for you all start having these conversations? I know you said it took a year for you to come up with the $10,000 per eviction figure, but I'm interested in how many FTEs you have dedicated to getting various outcomes, what software you use, just really the nitty-gritty pieces. That's the first part of the question. My second part of the question is whether or not you all are part of any collaborative efforts to kind of pool information and data across the sector.
We use a very sophisticated data collection platform called Excel for a lot of the. So, you know, it's, again, like for service providers, it's tough. Like it's an expense. And so, you know, we had to make a deliberate choice around allocating some resources to the housing court study before the city was paying for that. And that's, again, why we were incentivized to create a funding structure with a reimbursement rate model so that the owners would provide that data for us 12 months after. Again, because of the balance of what they pay for the service is predicated on the family being stable, and so they assess the family's fulfillment of the contractual obligations. And so that's free for us, but it takes a lot of creativity and some hard choices. I mean, it's part of the $4 million figure is a heavier investment in evaluations. But
What about the city?
So I think so a lot of our money for housing, and we fund affordable housing, you get a unit, we know what that is. I think we're not as, and if we're doing rental subsidies, we know that someone's housed, the right income. So those are sort of easy to track an outcome. We put money and we got something for that. I don't think we've done a good enough job with our contracts to social service providers. We're moving away from FTEs because a lot of folks will put in proposals saying, we need money because we need staff. And now we're saying, we're sort of in the output stage, which isn't good enough either. Okay, we're going to fund your staff, but we need to know what the output is. Now, I think we do need to move more intentionally to what is the outcome that we're actually getting. And that's the staffing and all of that is up to you all. We need to know what the outcome is. So we're moving in that direction, but we're not far enough along.
And one other thing related to, so the data tracking is the Apt Associates is an evaluation firm, and they've approached us to corroborate a lot of the data that we had received from the Housing Authority and other private institutional property owners, because they know that the investment from sophisticated philanthropists will require that level of rigor. And so the Tufts Health Plan Foundation and Nora Marina Cargi, I don't know if Nora is here, but she committed $50,000 towards that piece of research and a match. And so we're looking for the balance of that so that Apt can do that.
Thank you.
So just to wrap it up, I think we have 1 minute left. So this is a quick question for all of you. If you had to give one piece of advice to folks here who are entering into a collaborative project that is going to move to results, what would that be?
Be open and talk to each other.
Apt, a lot of careful listening and time.
Listening and time.
Careful listening.
I'd start off with a good data set and understand the problem, what you're trying to solve for.
So let's thank the panel who've done a great job and really interesting work.